Okay, so before we get started, since there are a few, since there are folks who are new here, the way this usually goes is we take one cap, we spend around 10 to 12 minutes on that one cap, reading it, and then post that we start discussion on it and ask questions, if any, and related things. So for this particular cap, I've also linked the PR that was made for this cap to be merged. So if after reading the cap, if possible, we can go through that and see what the process usually looks like. So I'm going to start a timer for around 10 minutes. Post that, if we need more time, then always we can extend it. But I'm going to start a timer for 10 minutes and we can get started. Uh, just give me 1 second. Let's start. Okay. And the timer starts in 3, 2, 1. Yeah, it's on. About a minute left.
Hey, Al, sorry I'm late. I thought I'd jump in if there's a meeting going on.
Thanks, Tim. Can you see the history of the chat? Do I need to paste you which one we're on?
Yeah, no, I cannot see the history.
Okay.
We are looking at the stateful set adding a min ready. Ravi has to drop at the bottom of the hour, so let's get started. Ravi, are you there?
Yes. Yeah. So what are the next steps here? Like, do I need to walk through the KEP or would someone
We
have...
can't see you, Ravi.
You can't hear me?
We can hear you, we can't see you.
I see. Okay. Right.
Ah, perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So what are the next steps? Like, do I need to share my screen and then walk through the KEP, or would people ask questions?
Sure. Usually I encourage people to like tell a story, like what is the problem and why are you trying to, what is it that we are trying to do here, like from a user perspective.
Sure. Let me start sharing my screen. Right. So this is the KEP. At a high level, what we want to do is we want to add a particular field called min ready seconds to stateful set. The problem as of now that we're trying to solve is, say if a stateful set pod comes up, it is always deemed to be ready, and ready in the sense that it is ready to serve the request. Whereas in real world, it may not be ready. It is still reconciling the state. For example, if it's a stateful set like Cassandra or some other database, we would like to have some time for the new replica or the new pod that is coming up to reconcile so that it can properly serve the requests that are coming in. So we have this particular field already available in other workload controllers like deployment and daemon set, but we do not have something similar for stateful set. And as far as the real world applications go, I think I gave one example. The other example could be a particular program which is behind a load balancer, any software which is behind a load balancer. We want to wait certain amount of time before it actually gets taken out of the load balancer. So these are like some of the scenarios that we have faced within OpenShift, and we noticed that this could be beneficial to the community as well. So we started working on this feature upstream in 1.22 timeframe. This has been around for a long time. Like I think people have been asking for it. And someone has, I think Mayank has started working on other aspect of this particular feature. We have something called max unavailable as well, which is not yet available in the stateful set. If you look at the linked Kubernetes issue that it tries to solve, it has got both the fields. This particular KEP solves one aspect of it, which is related to the min ready seconds. So those two are the technical problems, and this is just a bit of background, unless someone wants to add something.
Yeah, one question I had right off the bat was like, how does this relate to all the probes and all the things that we have for probes?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think we have mentioned that in Kubernetes document as well. So the readiness probe or the liveness or the health checks, they will give you certain amount of time before which a pod can be deemed ready, but that does not guarantee that it is ready to take the request, in the sense that you can have an additional delay which says, I would like to make sure that the pod is available for a certain amount of time before it is deemed as available. So the containers, all the containers within the pod should be ready for that much amount of time. The liveness checks or the health checks are at the container level, like technically, whereas all the containers in the pod should be ready for this much amount of time is what min ready seconds says.
So
Can
when,
you, sorry,
uh,
James, go ahead.
last question. So when does this specific amount of time start? Is it after the other probes are done and they give a thumbs up, or before, or during?
So the first one is done by the kubelet, in the sense that those health checks are done by kubelet. After that, say if the container is ready, and if all the containers in the pod are ready for that much amount of time, then it would be considered for, then it would be considered as available. So the first level of checking is done at the kubelet level.
So after the last container becomes ready, then it starts this timer.
Then it starts this time, so that all the pods are in ready state for X amount of time.
I think we might have to add more color to the KEP, Ravi.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's a useful distinction. I have a similar question, if I can jump in. This says making it ready, or available, sorry, but available in whose opinion? Like, do we prevent the endpoints from being marked ready? Or are they visible as ready in the normal fashion, but we don't move on to the next item if we're doing like a stateful set update or something?
The update is at the replica level. It's not at the container level, but it's at the replica level. So
right.
Once we do, once we check for the that particular pod to be available for X amount of time, we would go on to the pod, which is part of the stateful set.
So I'm coming at this. Sorry, I can't hear if you're still going.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm looking at this from like the networking, because you mentioned in here load balancers, but I'm not sure I see the integration point, because a load balancer will proceed as soon as the pod is marked ready, and there is no additional like ready plus wait a little while longer in all the load balancer controllers. So this additional wait either blocks the actual setting of readiness, like the pod readiness probes does, or it doesn't, but this doc doesn't say which one.
So I'm not sure about all the load balancers, but the way I was, or the way we were thinking about it, at least in OpenShift perspective, is we would like to use or the pod to be available for that amount of time, which includes the min ready seconds as well. Like say in the template, if we specify min ready seconds as like 10 seconds or 15 seconds, in the load balancer configuration, we would increase the value by 30 seconds, by 10 seconds or 20 seconds, whatever the amount of value that we give.
So from reading here, Ravi, it seems like the only controller that is going to be using this information is the stateful set controller and nothing else, right? Tim,
Yeah.
does that help what you were thinking of?
I mean, yes, except it calls out somewhere in here. Let me see if I can find it. I thought I saw. Yeah, here. As a Kubernetes user, I want to leverage stateful sets, min ready seconds behind service load balancers in cloud. This doesn't cover that at all, because the cloud load balancers don't pay any attention to min ready seconds.
Right. So that has to be manual. Like there is no automatic way at this point of time. But we would add that additional amount manually is what we are.
Who would add it manually?
So when when OpenShift gets installed, it actually creates the load balancer as well, and the time would include the min ready seconds that we have for those components. Like it's manual.
Load balancers map to services, and services map to pods, and we don't know whether there's a stateful set in between. Like there's the chain of trust doesn't include the workload controller. That's off to the side. That is
right. So that's why it is manual at this point of time.
Okay, but is there a plan? Is the long-term goal of this to factor into the rest of load balancers?
That is the plan, but at this point of time we wanted to make it manual. But if we get some feedback that yes, we like this to be included, we can do it. Like for us, being static is good enough at this point of time.
So this is the fun part, right? Like, I understand that it's good enough for you, but I'm not sure that I want to add API that doesn't do much unless it does stuff for everybody else. Like, I know it's really minor. It's like one field, right? And it wasn't actually clear if there's any controller changes other than the stateful set controller, right? But if we're going to add an API, I'd like to solve it. I'd like to make it worthwhile, to make it hold its own weight, right? Like, as an alternative question, why would we not push this all the way down to pods and then make the kubelet not set the ready until after all the other ready signals have been set, plus this time?
Yeah, so
and then all the controllers get it for free.
Correct. So that is something mentioned in the KEP as well. Like, if you look at the issue, the open issue, I think Brian, Grant, Clayton, and the rest of the folks were interested in having it within the pod, but there was not much of effort in that direction. Or someone has tried it in the past, but did not go through because of some technical reasons that I'm not fully aware of, or I cannot fully remember at this point of time.
Okay, here we go. Oh, wow, it's from 2018. Okay.
Yeah, it has been around for a long time. There it was mentioned that we wanted to have it within the pod spec so that everyone can actually use it. But in one of the points in the non-goals, we have explicitly mentioned that it takes a lot of change and we want to have consistency for all the controllers. That was the reason we are pushing it in this direction. But say in future, we are like, all of us are fine having or moving in that direction. We can do it that way.
Funny that 2 years ago, Brian suggested the same thing that I just came up with.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm skimming the issue now. The problem, okay, so I agree completely with what Brian said in his May 31, 2019 comment, which was, I also think min ready seconds should be added to pod, but I'm not opposed to adding it to stateful set since other controllers have it. Basically, the precedent is strong, and I would not be against adding it. What I would question though is if we set it in the controller, in stateful set, and we later wanted to add it to pod, how do we not make those additive? Because I don't think additive is what we would want.
So my understanding is it would not be additive, like we will remove it completely from the stateful set spec and we will have it within the pod.
Well, we can't remove stuff. So once it's added, it's forever, right? And so we have to define how it works with the new thing. So like, imagine I have a stateful set where I specify in my pod template the min ready seconds and in my stateful set min ready seconds. If I set them both to 30 seconds, the obvious behavior is it's going to wait 30 seconds for kubelet to set it, and then it's going to wait another 30 seconds for the workload.
Yeah, so my understanding is, say if it reaches the pod spec, that will take precedence, and whatever we specify, say if we cannot remove the API, the value that we have in the pod spec would take precedence when compared to the value that we have within the workload control. But that is something that we did not think through yet, like how the migration would work. Does that answer the question?
Okay. I mean, yes, it's not a satisfying answer, but it's an answer.
That is true.
I don't want to monopolize the floor. Anybody else have thoughts? I'm going to read this comment.
I'm just thinking that this has been approved for 122 and seems like this needs an update, Ravi, with the discussion that we've been having.
Sure. And Tim, to answer your other question, I think even the deployment controller does the same. Like we do not have endpoints controller getting updated or getting involved. It's just the stateful, it's just the deployment status that is getting reflected with available replicas and the min available seconds. So I do not know if it needs a change across the board, just like the min ready seconds within the pod spec.
Yeah, I'm just reading the comment linked, and it doesn't. I don't think it's a particular problem in that it's bringing parity. If this was net new, I'd probably push harder against it. So I won't get in the way. I do feel like it's a half of a solution,
Yeah. So,
but it's the same half that deployment has. So
yeah. So
sorry.
like we are trying to promote it to beta next release. Perhaps we can have this discussion during the beta again and then.
Yeah, but I do want to capture what we talked about today and update the cap, so we don't have to like try to remember where did we talk about this and when did we talk about this, and
Sure.
do we have notes and do we have recording?
Yeah, sure.
Just remember Brian's comment is very useful right now, right? When Tim was reading Brian's comments, and he came up with the same thing, so it helps if we update the cap right away with the discussion from today, so we don't have to relitigate one more time.
Sure. I can update the cap, like I'll open a PR with the discussion that we have, and perhaps you can comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, sorry. Mostly, I just would like a few words that like this doesn't automatically handle load balancers. And it's, that is a separate issue. This really is just bringing parity with the other workload controllers. Yeah. That's the main objective. And if I had seen that as reading it, I probably would have just not even commented.
I see. Okay. Yeah, in the non-goal section, we have mentioned that we wanted to bring it on par with the rest of the controllers, but I think I can make it explicit in the comment.
Yeah, no, I saw that. And then I saw the load balancer parts and my brain went, uh-oh, these things don't make sense to me.
Okay. I'll update the load balancer one at least. Awesome. So I need to head out now. Thanks a lot for having me. Unless you have any questions, just let me know, or you can ping me on Slack.
Yeah, we can follow up on the thread, Ravi, on SIG architecture. I'm sure the rest of us, the rest of the folks will have some comments.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
That was good. We actually found some stuff.
What I found the last time we did this reading group is I would bring caps that I thought were slam dunk sure things, and then we would still find things to talk about. And I mean that in a good way.
Yeah, of course. Amado, back to you.
Okay, so before we start, I just had one question, like in general about the process. So in this particular cap, I saw a field called required monitoring metrics. So is that something that's part of the template and required by all caps, or is that like per cap, or it's okay if that particular cap doesn't require it, or do features need to have some form of monitoring provided in their implementation?
I think it is an expectation unless you can explain why it's not necessary.
Yeah, also, is it coming from the PRR section, right?
I don't think so. I think it was like a separate field. Let me just cross check.
Yeah, it's under the PRR. It's a subheading.
Okay. Okay.
So basically, the point here is when you put this feature in production, you need to get some metrics out. You need to figure out like how people are using it, things like that, right? So we are trying to look from an operator point of view and not just like the developer point of view, which we typically end up doing. So that's the reason why we added the PRR section, and then we are making sure that people are thinking about it clearly and saying yes or no for things and exactly what they would be doing to make it more friendlier to operators.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Okay, so if no one else has any questions, I guess we can start with the second cap. So this one is on the node service log viewer. Again, I'm just going to set a 10-minute timer and we can get started. So the timer starts in 3, 2, and start.
And a bunch of people did the little green check mark reaction in Zoom. So if you finish early, feel free to toss that on and we don't have to wait the whole timer.
Madhav, do you know how to use Google for timer for 2 minutes or 10 minutes?
Yeah, so I just type in 10-minute timer.
Okay. Yeah, next time you can just share that screen so we know how many minutes we have.
Sure. Okay, sure. 2 minutes are remaining for what it's worth.
Also for shorter gaps, I think like 10 minutes seems a bit too long.
I think
Are we all ready?
Supriya still has a minute.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I have completed it. I still don't see that yes mark on my.
Click on reactions and you will see a check, green check.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
On Zoom Web, it's hidden under participants. Or am I the only person who still has to use the web interface?
We're all ready.
Has to as
Has to. Work will not let me install Zoom. Even in a Docker container, I asked.
That electron.
shall we start? If everyone is done, I think, yeah.
Yeah. So I cheated. I've read this one before. Is one of the KEP owners here that wants to talk about it, or are we just talking about it?
I don't think either of the KEP owners are here.
Okay.
I tried contacting someone from SIG Windows, but I don't think they could make it.
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, please.
I wanted to ask, like, since this was not mentioned in the KEP, then there probably might be a way of doing this, and I don't know of it. But like the KEP mentions that like currently administrators have to SSH into it, and instead of that, they can use kubectl. But it did not mention how authenticating in that case would work. Like, how would kubectl know that this person is allowed to use the logs command?
It says somewhere in here there's an RBAC, a new RBAC scope for node logs as opposed to pod logs. So you can grant RBAC to node/logs as a sub-resource.
Sorry, who's beeping?
I don't hear any beeping. I think it's you.
I'm the only one hearing beeping. Sorry. Okay, stop.
So I had a few questions that I wrote down. I see there's a giant discussion though, so I didn't read all the comments. So this might have been discussed. So I'll rely on you, Tim, to answer those probably. The control plane logs specifically, I know cloud providers lock down access to the control plane. Would there be is there any restrictions or sort of discussion around pulling the logs from the control plane there?
I think that is a great question that isn't clearly covered here. In the case of managed control planes, does this require that you give access to those? I don't think the answer, I think the answer is no, right? As in, you know, look at a GKE cluster, you don't see the master. It's not there, right? It's not a node. It might be running kubelet or it might not be. I mean, it is, but it might not be, right? And so I don't think there's a limitation on that. It's not, they are not control plane nodes. They're just an abstract control plane. So I think that could be clarified here. That's actually a really good point.
Yeah, that's the first thing my mind jumped to was, managed nodes. I wonder how that works. Okay. The next one was the specific callouts for systemd was really interesting. Was that talked about for limiting the scope to just systemd anywhere?
It's funny, I find myself as the representative of this because I was asking these same questions. Is somebody taking notes that we can forward on? Are we capturing this other than the recording?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm writing down a few notes. Should be
awesome, thank you. So the initial draft that I read, if my memory serves me, was very journal cuddle focused. And the other things were there. In fact, I think it was originally a flag. You had to say whether you wanted something from the journal or from a file. And the heuristic that is now in there was sort of at my behest, to say, I bet most of the time you don't need to specify the difference, right? So only specify the difference if you have to. So the heuristic is, first we'll look in the journal, then we'll look in some commonly named files, and we'll probably be able to find it. And if we make it through alpha and it turns out that that's not true, then we can come back and revisit.
Okay.
One related observation I had was this heavily relies on our kubelet, our version of kubelet. So people have other kubelets too. So how do we end up putting this in the conformance program? That would be my 2 cents on it.
Mm-hmm. And is the heuristic part of conformance, or is it simply like given a deterministically crafted query, does it work?
Right. And what should it actually return? Should it return exactly what our kubelet returns, or it could just return garbage, right? So
yes. And if I can pile on the same question, one that's not clear to me is the requirement for interleaving across nodes. Is that going to be client side, node side? Like, how is that done, given that timestamps are not always equally accessible given different logging formats, right? If I'm pulling from var log something.log, like it may not even have timestamps. Right? Or are we gonna sort of loose parse those?
Yeah, this seems very Red Hat centric, to be honest, Tim.
It is. And now the thing that I was sort of convinced of as I read this is almost everybody's using systemd anyway. And
right.
My own experience aligns with that, as much as I'm not so happy about it. Oh, this is recorded. It seems to be the state of the world, so that's probably okay. And if we end up, we're going to go through an alpha. If it turns out to be a big problem for a lot of people, we'll have to revisit it. That was my feeling.
Agreed. The one thing I really like about this is it'll help Windows folks, people who want to poke into Windows and like get logs back. Makes their life easier without having to, go to your infrastructure and go pull stuff.
Yeah,
I definitely like that aspect of it.
One of the things that I disliked about this is because kubectl logs was sort of a terminal command before. Now it becomes both a branch and a terminal. It's unclear whether those flags are additive. Like the principle I think that Cobra espouses is only the flags add as you traverse the tree, right? And so all the flags that apply to kubectl logs don't apply to kubectl logs nodes.
Right.
And in fact, some of them are defined differently. They're defined as the same name and they have different defaults or different meanings.
That's a lot of what I wrote down as a kube control maintainer right now. Was just I looked, I saw Maciej signed off on this. So there's breaking changes here, where if you have a pod named nodes, what happens to the subcommand? Right?
Ooh, good question.
Yeah, so there's definitely some incompatibility here. I actually probably would have wanted to see this as kubectl like node logs as its own command, because having worked with Cobra, it's really hard to introduce a subcommand to a command that already exists. It's like really difficult to pull that off correctly. So we may need to revisit this.
Yeah, you should jump on that. I've never used Cobra in great detail outside of the trivial stuff. One of the things, maybe it makes sense to have a dash resource or something flag to it. But that was my first thought. But then, there's flags here that are defined with different defaults, and having the default set differently for different resource types is weird. I understand the desire not to have more top-level kubectl commands, right? Like in hindsight, probably this should have always been kubectl logs pod, right? But it's not. And I'm not a kubectl maintainer, so that's on you guys to figure out what you want to do forward. Nor am I a great CLI designer, so.
Yeah, I'm far from that too, but I'll bring this up with SIG CLI at our next meeting, and yeah, we may need a couple changes in here for compatibility.
Right.
That's great. I didn't think about the case of what if I have a pod called nodes.
It almost feels like, don't worry about the things in the middle. There's no API change. We are going to do some tweaks at the back. We're going to do some tweaks in the front, and everything will be fine. Don't worry too much about it. Magic is happening. That's the feeling I get from this one.
Like I noticed that kubectl logs has a dash tail flag, and this has a dash tail flag, but they have different defaults. They seem to mean the same thing, but one is defaulted to -1 and one is defaulted to 0. And kubectl logs has a follow, but this doesn't. And there was one more. What was the other one? I lost track of it. There's a few other flags that kubectl logs has that this doesn't. So yeah, I mean, my main comment would be it'd be nice to unify these into a coherent story.
I have a separate Uber question, as in
Arun, it looks like you're talking, but oh, there you are. Sorry, you just delayed.
Yeah, so journal CUTL is actually very verbose, or rather, there are too many events there. So if you have a cluster with 20 nodes and you just get all of the logs of journal CUTL on your master, is there some sort of throttling involved, or do you just overwhelm everything that's available? It's very good. I mean, I really like looking at journal CUTL logs, but I really redirect it to a file, and it's usually a few hundred megs. And then I very gradually begin to look at it on an individual node. So if I have a 30-node cluster.
This has a dash service flag. So I imagine you always want to specify the dash service flag, though it does seem like it's optional.
So do we end up DDoSing the API server?
Yeah.
If many people run this at the same time, and there's huge amounts of logs coming back through the API server.
So the only grace is that the system admin is the only one who can run it. So hopefully he knows what he's doing, he or she. But
also, one thing which was mentioned in the risks was, what if like the logs which we are getting, they are too big in size, and it was written in the second line that to mitigate this, we can document that node logs should always be rotated. What does rotating the logs mean? I didn't understand that.
In this case, context, rotating generally means throwing away old data. So you don't have last week's data, you only have yesterday's data.
So would that mean that if we are to support this, there would be a change in how much data we store, past data we store?
I don't think that's going to fly. Like, we can recommend that people do anything we want, but that doesn't make them do it. We need to protect the system against it.
Yeah. Typically, you gzip the older thing and then start a fresh file, right? So that's what they call in rotation. You still have the old data, it's just gzip, so you'll have to go get it for yourself if you need it.
Which I believe journal CUTL does anyway, right?
Right.
Yep.
Or journal D.
But yes, there are companies like Splunk who are built for essentially handling very large logs, and journal CUTL is one of the logs of that size. It is not a.
Yeah, that was the other angle I was thinking about, was lots of these log aggregator type companies, they end up doing sidecars and to capture this kind of information. So are we like competing with them to some extent? Are they doing something better that we need to learn from?
I feel like they're just doing the log forwarding, right? It's similar to how we're doing like logs of any parts. So even if we provide this option, it'll just forward this to Splunk. And I think it would be helpful for teams where there are newcomers and they don't have to give permissions to all these node level permissions.
Supriya, as an operator, like, would you like this? Like, what's your experience?
I think I would like this. So, in my team, like, so we actually have like a month or two to see the people, like, how they are, can we trust them? And then we provide access. So for us, if we have this option, we could just let people read from Splunk and we don't even have to worry about the access control. So that's something that I was interested in as soon as I saw this.
It's clear that this is never going to be and should not and try to be a replacement for Splunk, right? We should not provide a very rich query language on top of this. This is not Elasticsearch.
Right.
And the other thing was about the time skew, which Tim was talking about. So what are the thoughts there? Do we actually specify which node is providing what? And
I don't think that's covered in here very much.
I've got to drop now. Bye, everyone. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, me too.
Okay.
Looking
Bye,
forward to the
everyone.
next one.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I
everyone.
think
Yeah.
we're at
thanks for
time.
this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Eddie, are you going to go back and follow up with these folks?
Yeah, I put it on our 6CLI agenda.
Cool. One of the things that wasn't clear to me also, sorry, last parting note, all the stuff like grep and interleaving, it wasn't clear to me whether that's being done client side, kubelet side, or API server in the middle. So it would be interesting to figure out if they're expecting the CLI to do all that heavy lifting, how much, you know, buffer does it need to store in memory, or is it going to buffer to disk, or if we're expecting the kubelet to do all that.
All right, I wrote that down. Cool.
Cool.
Thanks, team.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you.